Hey, welcome to our very first Astro Movie Review. This is a brand new series where you can learn astrology watching iconic movies with clear astrological themes. Today we're going to be looking at the 1998 film Dangerous Beauty. The film stars Catherine McCormack, which you might recognize as Mel Gibson's childhood sweetheart in Braveheart. If you're new to astrology, or you've been told you need to work experientially on the planet Venus in your chart, then you'll definitely want to see this film. Watching films is an excellent way to get in touch with an archetype and can be very therapeutic as well. Although Dangerous Beauty is not literally about the Roman goddess, make no mistake, her archetypal influence weaves itself throughout this film. This is a story that depicts all the facets that Venus embodies, specifically love, marriage, lust, sex, but also its role in fulfilling the more Taurian needs of wealth and money. Based on the book by Margaret Rosenthal titled The Honest Courtesan, the film chronicles the true story of the Renaissance courtesan named Veronica Franco. It's Veronica Franco who introduces herself in the opening narration as a courtesan, but also makes it clear that it's these Vestals who represented the face of the city of Venice. In fact, in this brilliant adaptation, it's the city of Venice itself that is the true star of the movie. This is why we open up with these images that allow us to imagine that the goddess of courtesans and Vestal virgins has set up shop in one of the most beautiful and prosperous cities of 1500s Europe. Venice was selected as a backdrop not only because it happens to be the place where the real-life poetess Veronica Franco lived, but also because Venice was named after the Roman deity Venus herself. But since every good story needs some conflict to keep things interesting, the film is also a tale of the paradoxical and restrictive existence within which the women of Venice lived during the late 1500s. But it's told through the eyes of a woman who invoked the traits of the planet Venus in order to rise above those same restrictions. So we first encounter Venice through its most iconic feature, its canals. The image of the courtesans wading in seductively through the canals of Venice is far more fitting the planet's history than you might imagine. In Babylon, where astrology was born, Venus was known as Ishtar, or Inanna in her Sumerian name. Ishtar was closely linked to the constellation Eridu, known in Mesopotamia as the River. So this is because during the 6th month of the Sumerian and Babylonian calendars, that constellation rose with the sun alongside Virgo, which happens to be the sign where Venus has its fall. So there's a long cultural explanation for why Venus has its fall in Virgo. I won't get into it here, but if you're interested, let me know in the comments and I'll do a blog post about it on my website. So it was during the 6th month that the priestesses of Inanna or Ishtar would come out to ceremoniously bathe in the river, washing away all their impurities. This cultural connection between cleanliness and purity, while not well known today, appears in the work of a Hellenistic astrologer named Vedius Valens, who describes Venus as, quote, the planet of cleanliness. This is, of course, goes back to Inanna's bathing in the river and is the reason why in the Epic of Gilgamesh she proposes marriage to him while he's bathing in the river. Whether accidentally or not, Dangerous Beauty also captures this cleanliness aspect of Venus in a wonderful montage in which Veronica is bathed and cleaned to begin her training as a courtesan. So just like the wealthy citizens of Venice, she is given proper hygiene and glamorized so as to be worthy of the city's namesake. But Veronica's character is archetypally very rich because she not only embodies the beauty and open lustiness of the goddess of love, she also embodies the wit, youth, charm, freedom, and intellectual capacity of Mercury. And just like a good mercurial psychopomp, Veronica is not only allowed to frequent the plutonic pleasure domes of a city known for its courtesans, but she also brings that world to open light by writing and speaking publicly about that world. It's the mercurial part of her character that in fact draws her to the life of a prostitute because, as her mother informs her, courtesans are the most educated women in the world. Later, in a more poignant mercurial scene, Veronica is brought to give news of the war to the Orthodox women of Venice and lets them know that, quote, a woman's greatest and hard-won asset is an education, and that, quote, promiscuity of the mind leads to promiscuity of the body.
The Latin for banana is Ariana. Banana tree is Pala. A woman's greatest and most hard-won asset is an education.
Veronica sees herself not as, quote, Venus come to bless the Venetians, but as, quote, poetess to kings. In fact, the issue of education as guarantor of freedom was paramount to the real Veronica Franco, who suggested that, quote, the most wretched level of experience is achieved when an individual is not only made subject to the desires of another, but left without the freedom of choice. Echoing that frustration derived from a lack of significance, Marco's sister says in one of the film's best lines that, quote, no biblical hell could ever be worse than the state of perpetual inconsequence. Marco Vernier, played by the smoldering Rufus Sewell, is Veronica's unobtainable love interest. Some aspects of Marco are archetypally somewhat solar in that he ends up being a hero in the story, and because he has a certain stature as a leader, since he's the senator of the city-state of Venice. But the relationship between he and Veronica is much more reminiscent of the mythical dynamic between Venus and Mars. Mars in the mythology, you'll recall, was the virile god of war who had an illicit affair with Venus, who was married to Vulcan, another fiery god, but this one less attractive and unkind. Venus and Mars's relationship was likewise characterized by a high degree of passion. Although Ares, the Greek version of Mars, was not well liked, Mars, the patriarch of Rome, was held in high esteem by his people, much like Marco is looked upon by the Venetians. We even have a similarity between their names, Mars and Marco. But there are other similarities. One, Marco, like the god of war, has an actual war to go to with the Turks. And two, Marco also engages in conflicts and has his own personal anger and jealousies to dominate when he learns that his beloved sleeps with other men for money. And lastly, he returns from war abroad to fight another battle in the court with the Inquisition when the Church threatens to execute Veronica. So while not making Marco a one-dimensional angry version of Mars, this film does establish within him the connection between desire and passion, which is very characteristic of the Mars-Venus symbolism. But while in the mythology Venus ends up taming Mars's aggressive nature, in the film, Veronica instead demands that Marco use his assertiveness early on to defend his love for her and to stand up to social expectations and pressure from tradition. He doesn't do this until the end of the movie, when the stakes become so high that to not defend his truth would have tragic repercussions for her. Notwithstanding such fertile ground for desire, Veronica also gracefully represents the repressed, dark sexual atmosphere of Venice. Much like Venus's recognition of Pluto's loneliness in the underworld, Veronica also publicly acknowledges the repressed side of the women of Venice when she sarcastically raps in a poetic duel.
Venice, mother, virgin, queen, and goddess. To be all five at once is no mean trick. If women's lust, lost Eden are addressed to be hearth, heart, and poem to every prick.
In one scene, after her unobtainable lover is forced by tradition and status to reject her as a marriage candidate, Veronica taunts him with her illicit promiscuity by asking if her beauty is cruel. Marco has agreed to marry a very pious but dispassionate woman by arrangement to further his aspirations. But having noticed the absence of the plutonic passion he feels for Veronica, he attempts to reconnect with it by asking his very proper wife what her most, quote, secret deep desire is. Of course, Julia's religious propriety, played wonderfully by Naomi Watts, keeps her from understanding what Marco means. The Venus-Pluto archetype also reaches a dangerous crescendo for Veronica toward the end of the movie when she's forced to confront the sexually sadistic King Henry of France, played by Jake Weber. In a scene that underplays the dangers that prostitutes actually often face, we cut away from the king's implied perversions and are left only with the unrealistic indication that our lovely heroine manages to tame his weird menace with her charms. She truly is a goddess. And of course, this is 1998 Hollywood, which is a far cry from 2024 Hollywood. The last shadowy and sinister Pluto-Venus combination comes to Veronica when her beauty is purported to bewitch men, leading the Inquisition to arrest her on the charges that she's a witch, the devil in our midst. And lastly, let's look at Jupiter's interactions with Venus made flesh in the form of Veronica and the city of Venice. Jupiter governs religion, morality, and revelations of truth, among other things. In the film, the matter of truth is significantly embodied by the dark Jovian character Maffeo Venere, who is Marco's jealous cousin. His moralistic Jupiter looks upon Venus and sees only the inappropriate shadow that he himself carries of the aforementioned goddess. So this shadow side of Venus that Maffeo holds is projected onto Veronica, who is held accountable through his own problematic Jupiter. This is represented by his desire for literary success and his envy of Veronica's patronage. Patronage being one of the Jupiter words that we work with, which we see when her poetry book is published by his uncle but not his own book. Maffeo then turns his envy and hatred toward Veronica into a larger, more sinister, moralistic condemnation of all the sexual promiscuity of Venice and its women. Because of this, the courtesans become the religious scapegoats for the devastating plague that strikes the city. So Veronica is arrested and accused of the witchcraft that has condemned the city in the eyes of God. Like Aphrodite being brought before the judgment of Zeus and the rest of the Olympians, when she's caught in the throes of passion with Ares, so too the very integrity of the city is called into question in its courtroom. In a wonderfully allegorical scene, Marco urges Veronica's lovers to stand up for her while equating her to Venice. He says, "If Venice does not stand up now and acknowledge who she is, then we are all damned, not before this court, but before eternity." It is through Veronica that Venus is brought out of the dungeons of Hades and asked to assume her rightful place as the patroness of Venice.